The blizzard howled over Duluth. A red truck tore through the snow, and then a scream, metal, silence. Officer Mark Collins lay bleeding on the frozen road. From the storm, a small voice cried, "Dad, he's not moving!" 8-year-old Emma Brooks dropped her bag as Max, her aging German shepherd, barked into the white. Miles away, Noah Brooks felt it, the stillness before tragedy. He ran into the storm, not as a hero, but as a father. Because some miracles don't need perfection, only courage and faith. If you believe God still works through loyal hearts, drop a comment, like, and tell us where you're watching from. The wind off Lake Superior howled through Duluth, sweeping white veils of snow across Maple Creek Road, where the world seemed caught between silence and storm. The air was bitter and metallic, biting at every breath, and the faint amber streetlights flickered like tired stars above the frozen asphalt. Small footprints traced a path along the road's edge, those of a little girl wrapped in a blue parka too big for her, her woolen hat tipped to one side. Her name was Emma Brooks, 8 years old, with wide gray-blue eyes that carried a softness rare for this cold city. She walked with her mittened hand brushing the coarse fur of her companion, Max, an old German shepherd whose black and tan coat had faded to silver around the muzzle. His gait was slow but proud, each step careful, the way an old soldier walks through a world that has grown quieter than his memories. Emma talked to him the way children talk to the only creature who always listens. "We're almost home, Max," she said, her voice muffled by her scarf. The dog huffed as though answering, his breath a cloud of white steam. At the far end of the lane, the dull flash of hazard lights glowed behind a police cruiser parked half-buried in snow. The man leaning over its hood was Officer Mark Collins, 34, a man of solid frame and careful habits. His brown hair was cropped short, flecked with snow, and a faint shadow of stubble traced his square jaw. His eyes, steel gray and observant, belonged to someone who had seen too many things go wrong to take anything for granted. He wore the calm of a man who had once carried chaos on his back and had sworn to keep it from spreading again. A scar cut a pale line along his chin, the ghost of a knife wound from his early days on the Denver force, a case that had ended badly, the kind that leaves a dent in faith and sleep alike. Duluth had been his fresh start, a place quieter, simpler, or so he had hoped. He scribbled on his ticket pad, his breath curling in the air. The sound reached him first, a low, grinding growl, an engine pushed too hard. Mark looked up sharply, the instinct of years sparking before thought. From around the curve came a red pickup truck, its headlights cutting through the snow like errant comets. It was moving too fast, fishtailing, the tires spraying slush. But there was something deliberate about its line of motion, too steady for panic, too direct for accident. Mark's chest tightened. "Hey!" he shouted, stepping back. But the truck didn't slow. The engine roared, a howl of metal and intent, and in the next instant, it struck. The impact was a thunderclap, throwing him backward into the cruiser before his body crumpled into the snow. The ticket pad flew from his hands, pages scattering like frightened birds. Emma froze. The scream caught in her throat, her heart a sharp, panicked drum. Max barked, a deep, commanding sound that tore through the storm. The red taillights blurred into streaks of color as the truck vanished into the curtain of snow. For a second, there was only wind and silence, and then Emma was running. Her boots slipped on the ice, arms flailing, breath ragged. Max bounded ahead, paws kicking up white dust, his old muscles remembering the rhythm of rescue. They reached the officer's body, the snow around him blooming red. Mark's hand twitched, his eyes half open, the world spinning above him. "Help!" Emma cried, her voice thin against the storm. "Somebody help!" But the woods were still. Max barked again, pacing around the fallen man, his breath fast, his tail stiff, his eyes locked on Emma. She dropped to her knees, trembling. She had seen hurt animals before, a bird with a broken wing, a neighbor's cat hit by a bike, but never this. Blood looked different in the snow, almost unreal. "Stay with him," she whispered to Max, choking back tears. Then she turned and ran. The Brooks cabin stood half a mile uphill, tucked among pines that bowed under the weight of ice. Inside, the smell of coffee lingered near the wood stove where Noah Brooks sat reading a weather report on his laptop. He was in his late 30s, lean and weather-worn, with the kind of face shaped by both laughter and loss. His sandy brown hair curled slightly when damp, and a short beard covered a strong, tired jaw. His right arm rested in a shoulder brace, a reminder of the wildfire rescue that had nearly cost him his life the previous year. Once, he'd been one of Minnesota's top mountain rescue medics, the man called when no one else could make it through. But injuries and exhaustion had forced him into leaving a restlessness that never slept. When the door burst open, snow and panic rushed in together. "Dad!" Emma gasped, cheeks flushed red, eyes wild. "A man! He's hurt! A red truck hit him!" The mug shattered as it fell from Noah's hand. "Where?" "Down the road. The curve by the bridge." There was no hesitation. He grabbed his old rescue pack, slung it across his good shoulder, and snatched a flashlight from the hook. "Stay here," he started, but Emma's tear-streaked face stopped him. He exhaled, jaw tightening. "Fine, you follow, but stay behind me." They plunged back into the storm. Branches whipped their coats, the wind carrying the distant hum of sirens that hadn't yet reached them. Max led the way, nose low, his bark cutting through the night. When the beam of Noah's flashlight finally found the cruiser, he saw the officer lying motionless, one arm bent unnaturally. "Stay back, Em," he ordered, voice tight. Kneeling beside Mark, he pressed 2 fingers to the neck. A pulse, weak but alive. Relief flared sharp and quick. "Hang in there, buddy," he muttered. He tore open his medkit, pressing gauze to the gash along the man's temple, then adjusted the cervical collar he kept for mountain rescues. His hands moved with precision, automatic, every motion guided by old instinct rather than thought. Mark stirred faintly, breath shallow. His lips moved, but no words came. "Easy," Noah said. "You're gonna be okay." He checked the man's airway, splinted the arm using a rolled magazine and tape. Max stood beside him, staring down the empty road, muscles rigid. Somewhere out there, the faint echo of an engine faded into the storm. Minutes felt like hours before the distant wail of an ambulance rose through the valley. The sound washed over them like the first warmth of dawn. Noah exhaled, his fingers trembling only once the stretcher arrived. Paramedics took over, their lights flashing red and blue across the snow. Emma stood beside Max, her small hand buried in his fur. The world looked unreal in those colors. White, crimson, cobalt, like stained glass reflecting something holy and terrible. As they loaded Mark into the ambulance, Emma tugged her father's sleeve. "Dad," she whispered, "I saw part of his plate." Noah turned. "What?" "It started with 4ZK. Her voice wavered, but her eyes were clear. He nodded slowly, memorizing it. "That's good, sweetheart. That's real good." When the ambulance disappeared around the bend, its siren swallowed by snow, the forest seemed to breathe again. The wind eased, Noah stood still, the flashlight dimming in his hand. His gaze lingered on the red stains melting into white, the tire marks already fading under fresh snow. Someone had meant to kill that man. He didn't know why, but he could feel it. The deliberate aim, the silence afterward. He looked down at Emma, who clung to Max's neck. The old dog's fur was wet, his eyes glinting amber in the dark. "Let's go home," Noah said softly. But even as they walked, he kept glancing back at the curve, where the storm had swallowed everything but the faint scent of gasoline and blood. Snow still blanketed Duluth in unbroken silence when the first light of dawn crept across Lake Superior. The world was a washed-out watercolor of gray and white, the kind of cold that found its way through gloves and skin straight into the bones. Inside St. Luke's Hospital, fluorescent light hummed faintly over linoleum floors polished to mirror sheen. Officer Mark Collins awoke to that sterile brightness, disoriented at first. The antiseptic smell, the muffled beeping of monitors, and the tug of an IV line at his arm. His head throbbed as memory fought its way back. The red truck, the roar of its engine, then snow, pain, and silence. He tried to move, but the sling around his shoulder and the bandages along his ribs protested sharply. The door opened softly, revealing Sheriff Teresa Hale, a woman in her early 40s with auburn hair cropped just above her collar, streaked faintly with silver at the temples. Her face carried the graceful fatigue of someone who'd spent decades balancing duty and empathy, though her green eyes still held a spark that no number of winters could dull. She wore a heavy gray coat dusted with snow, the badge clipped neatly at her belt, and her voice was calm but clipped when she spoke. "Good to see you awake, Collins." She placed a folder on the tray beside his bed. "You gave the EMTs a hell of a scare." Mark's dry lips curved into something between a wince and a smile. "Guess I don't bounce like I used to." He studied her face for a moment. Steady, unreadable, the way all good sheriffs learn to be. "Did you find anything?" Teresa's jaw tightened. "Not much. Tire impressions washed out in the snow. But your dash cam was dead before the impact. Someone killed the feed manually." Mark blinked. "That's not possible. I checked it before my shift." Possible or not, someone made sure it wouldn't see what was coming. She flipped the folder open, revealing a printed list of vehicle models. "The paint chips from your cruiser match an older Silverado, probably late 90s. Red. We're checking registries, but, Her voice trailed into silence, heavy enough to feel like a verdict. Back at the Brooks cabin, the morning passed in uneasy quiet. Noah Brooks sat by the window, his injured shoulder strapped tight, coffee cooling beside him. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the red streak of that truck. Outside, snow fell in lazy spirals, soft as ash. Emma knelt by the fireplace, brushing Max's fur while the old dog dozed with his head on her lap. His tail flicked when the floor creaked, still alert despite age. Emma's voice was small when she said, "Dad, do you think the man will live?" Noah exhaled slowly. "He's strong. He'll make it." He wanted to believe it. Saying it aloud made it almost true. By afternoon, the phone rang. Teresa's voice crackled through the line. "Mr. Brooks, I'd like to come by. Ask a few questions." Her tone was polite, but weighted. Within the hour, a dark SUV pulled up outside the cabin, its tires crunching on ice. Teresa stepped out, brushing snow from her coat. She wasn't tall, but she carried herself with a steadiness that made her seem immovable. Inside, she introduced herself to Emma with a warm but measured smile before turning to Noah. "Your daughter's quick thinking saved an officer's life. I need to talk about what she saw. Emma repeated the details as best she could. The flash of red, the roar, the partial plate 4ZK, and the way the driver didn't even try to swerve. Teresa wrote everything down neatly in a small black notebook. "You've got a sharp memory, kiddo. That helps." Before leaving, she bent slightly toward Max, scratching his ear. "And you, old boy, you might have bought that officer a few more minutes." The dog's eyes half closed in approval. That night, wind screamed through the valley like something alive. The forest around Maple Creek groaned under ice, and the brook's chimney rattled with every gust. Noah sat by the table with the lamp low, writing notes from memory, plate fragments, direction of travel, anything. Max suddenly lifted his head, ears pricking toward the window. His growl was low, primal. Noah froze. Through the frost, faint headlights glimmered once at the tree line, then vanished. A smell slipped through the cracks in the door, sharp, chemical, gasoline. Unseen beyond the tree line, Travis Holt watched the cabin. He was 30, thin but hard-edged, with greasy blonde hair tucked under a black beanie and a scruff of beard clinging to a gaunt face. His eyes, pale and restless, belonged to a man who slept little and trusted no one. Tattoos of wolves and barbed wire wound up both arms, faded by time and cheap ink. He had once worked oil rigs in North Dakota before debts and bad company dragged him into darker trades. Now he was a driver for men who paid well and asked for silence, especially from their enemies. The red truck idled a few yards back, its muffler patched, its paint flecked with ice. He pulled out a burner phone and dialed. A deep voice answered, smooth but cold. "Report." Travis's breath fogged the glass. "The cop lived. Kid saw the plate." A pause. "Then keep the kid out of this. Whatever it takes." The line went dead. He stared at the phone, jaw tight, a flicker of regret crossing his face before he buried it under habit. Regret got men killed. He flicked his cigarette into the snow, watching the ember hiss out, then drove away, tires cutting long scars into the ice. The next morning, the wind eased, and the world seemed deceptively calm. Emma tugged on her coat, eager to visit the creek behind the cabin where icicles hung like glass bells. "Stay where I can see you," Noah warned, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone balancing protection and trust. Max trotted beside her, his breath steaming in the cold. The path was narrow, winding, between trees heavy with frost. The creek itself was mostly frozen, save for a thin ribbon of water moving beneath the ice. Max sniffed the air, suddenly alert. His paws stopped at a shallow indentation in the snow. Emma crouched beside him, brushing away the powder. Beneath, tire tracks, thin, sharp-edged, fresh. A few feet away lay a small shard of metal, coated in crimson paint. Her pulse quickened. "Dad!" she shouted, holding up the fragment. Noah came running, flashlight cutting across the snow. His face hardened as soon as he saw it. "Inside. Now." Within an hour, Teresa arrived again, followed by a deputy carrying evidence bags. "Where'd you find it?" she asked. "Down by the creek," Noah said. "Could be the same truck." Teresa crouched to examine it, her gloved fingers steady despite the cold. "Old Silverado," she murmured. "Exactly what we're looking for." She stood, scanning the woods. "He's been here recently." Before she left, Noah asked quietly, "You really think someone meant to kill that officer?" Teresa's eyes met his. "I think someone didn't want him asking the wrong questions. And now they know your daughter saw something she shouldn't have." Her breath clouded in the air like smoke. "Lock your doors. Don't let her out of sight. That night, the Brooks cabin glowed warm from within, but the world outside was darkness and wind. Noah sat with his rifle leaned by the door, the weight of unease heavier than the snow pressing on the roof. Emma had fallen asleep with Max curled against her bed, his ears twitching even in dreams. The fire hissed softly. Noah stared through the frosted window, wondering not if danger would return, but when. Snow fell thicker over Duluth that night, the wind cutting through the harbor like a knife drawn across glass. The lake churned dark beneath sheets of ice, its breath rising in ghostly mist that swallowed the waterfront. At 2:17 a.m., the stillness was broken by a sharp, thunderous crack. Then orange light bloomed behind the police station. Within minutes, the old evidence warehouse by the docks became a furnace. Flames clawed through the wooden beams, reflecting off the ice like molten gold. Sirens wailed through the city, slicing through the cold silence. By the time the first responders arrived, the fire had already eaten the roof. The building's windows glowed white-hot, and the smell of burning plastic and gasoline filled the air. Sheriff Teresa Hale stood outside the barrier tape, coat collar up, her breath turning to frost as she watched the inferno. The heat was fierce, almost personal, as if someone wanted her to feel it. Behind her, Fire Chief Dan Mercer, a burly man in his 50s with soot-streaked cheeks and thinning gray hair, shook his head. "Accelerant," he said grimly. "Gasoline, maybe ethanol. Whoever did this knew exactly where to start it." Teresa's jaw set. "The evidence locker?" "Dead center," he confirmed. "Everything gone." Hours later, Officer Mark Collins limped into the scene, leaning on a metal cane. His injured shoulder was still bound under his jacket, his face pale under the wash of emergency lights. "Tell me it's not what I think," he muttered. Teresa didn't answer. She pointed toward the smoking remains. "Every copy, dash cams, body cams, internal logs, all gone." Mark exhaled sharply, eyes narrowing. "That was no accident." "No," she agreed, her voice low. "It was a message." By dawn, ash covered the snow like gray dust. The two stood at the edge of the ruin, their shadows long in the half-light. Teresa flipped through her notes, frustration etched into her brow. "They burned everything tied to the red truck." Mark's voice was rough. "Victor Kane." Teresa looked up. "The name again?" "He used to run logistics under my command in Denver," Mark said, staring into the smoke. "Sharp guy, ex-sergeant, liked to bend rules. I filed a report on him. Kickbacks from transport contractors. He vanished before internal affairs could move in." His eyes darkened. "If he's here, this isn't random." That afternoon, news of the fire spread through Duluth like frost creeping over glass. The Brooks cabin remained quiet except for the radio murmuring faint updates. Emma Brooks sat on the couch, coloring a picture of Max wearing a medal. Her father, Noah, stood by the window, staring at the distant column of smoke rising from the harbor. Max lay by the door, his ears twitching with every gust of wind. When the knock came, it was firm and familiar. Teresa entered, trailed by Mark. His limp was pronounced, but his expression carried renewed determination. "We need your help," Teresa said to Noah. "Your daughter mentioned a boy at school, Eli Turner." Emma perked up. "Eli's my friend. He said his grandpa used to fix cars for Mr. Kane." Teresa's eyes sharpened. "Would that be near Skyline Trail?" Emma nodded quickly. "An old garage. He said nobody goes there now. It's haunted." Mark exchanged a look with Teresa. Haunted's another word for abandoned. By late afternoon, snow began again, soft, but relentless. The three adults drove toward Skyline Trail in Teresa's SUV, tires crunching over frozen ruts. The world outside blurred into white and shadow. Mark rode in silence, his gloved hands tight around the cane resting across his lap. Inside his mind, memories flickered. Victor's easy grin in briefing rooms, the quiet jokes that always carried something darker beneath. Noah noticed the tension, but said nothing. He recognized the look of a man haunted not by ghosts, but by guilt. The garage appeared at the edge of the forest, half collapsed under the weight of years and snow. The tin roof sagged, its edges rusted, and the front doors hung crooked on their hinges. Faded paint still read Kane Auto Repairs above the doorway, the name almost erased by weather and time. Teresa cut the engine, her breath fogging the windshield. "We go slow," she said. "Could be unstable or worse." Inside, the air smelled of damp ash and oil. Charred timbers jutted from the walls like ribs. Their flashlights carved tunnels through the darkness, dust swirling in the beams. Noah's boots crunched over debris. "Someone's been here recently," he murmured. Footprints. Fresh, leading toward the back. Mark followed, cane steady, flashlight trembling slightly in his bad hand. When he swept it across the far wall, the light caught on something metallic beneath a tarp. He stepped closer, pulled the cover aside, and froze. Beneath it lay the burned frame of a truck, its paint charred black, but faint streaks of crimson clung to the edges. The cab was half melted, tires gone, windshield shattered into glittering ice. Teresa crouched, brushing soot from the rear bumper. Slowly, the faint outline of three characters emerged beneath the grime. 4ZK. "That's it," Mark breathed. "That's the plate." He crouched beside her, pain tightening his face. "They torched it, but not before moving it here. They wanted it hidden until they were sure the evidence was gone." Noah scanned the walls. They nearly pulled it off. Teresa straightened, frowning at a small object glinting near the floor drain. A spent lighter, cheap plastic, its metal cap still warm to the touch. "This fire wasn't old," she said softly. "Someone was here recently, maybe even tonight." All three turned at once toward the open door. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muffling the world in silence. But somewhere close, beneath that silence, came the faint crack of a twig breaking. Max's ears shot up, fur bristling. "Lights off!" Teresa hissed. The beams went dark. They listened. For a long moment, nothing but wind. Then, from the tree line, the low growl of an engine turning over, quick and smooth. Mark limped to the window, catching a glimpse of taillights fading into the storm, red streaks swallowed by white. He felt a shiver crawl up his spine. "We're being watched." Teresa exhaled, steadying her voice. "Let them watch. They just confirmed they've got something to lose." She turned to Noah. "We'll secure the scene. Get forensics up here in the morning. Until then, keep your family inside. Lights on. Whoever we're chasing doesn't like loose ends." As they left the garage, snow began to bury the tire tracks behind them, covering each sign of pursuit as quickly as it was made. Mark looked back once. Through the falling snow, the garage seemed to breathe smoke again, faint wisps curling from its vents as though the fire still lived inside. The old drain near the center hissed softly, steam rising from the metal, still warm. Someone had been there only moments ago. He turned toward the others, his voice barely above the wind. "This isn't over." Outside, the storm thickened, and the road home vanished beneath the snow. By nightfall, Duluth had vanished beneath a white wall of fury. Snow poured from the heavens like torn linen, swirling in violent spirals that erased the streets, the lake, even the horizon. The storm had come faster than the forecast, swallowing Enger Park in its teeth of wind and ice. Inside the sheriff's temporary command post, a converted ranger cabin at the park's base, Sheriff Teresa Hale stood over a map littered with red markers. Her auburn hair was tied back beneath a wool cap, and her eyes, normally calm, burned with sleepless intensity. Around her, radios crackled with half-broken signals. "The storm's grounded the chopper," she said, her voice clipped. "We go in on foot if we have to." Across the table, Officer Mark Collins adjusted the sling on his shoulder, jaw tight against pain. He wore layers of tactical wool beneath his winter coat, his badge barely visible under the scarf. The cane was gone. He refused it tonight. "If Victor's moving shipments through the old tunnels near the port slope, we can't wait till morning," he said. "Every hour gives him more ground to vanish." Teresa gave a short nod. "We split into 2 search teams. I'll take the east approach. You and Noah cover the storage lane by the frozen docks." Back at the Brooks cabin, the wind shrieked through the eaves like a living thing. Noah Brooks paced by the window, flashlight in hand, his rescue jacket half-zipped. He had that look again, the one Emma recognized from the wildfire photos, when he'd seen the sky on fire and run into it anyway. Emma Brooks, bundled in her blanket, watched him silently from the couch. Max, their German shepherd, rested near the hearth, but not asleep. His ears twitched with every sound outside, tail stiff as wire. The storm pressed against the walls, rattling the shutters. Then came the knock. It was faint at first. 3 dull thuds against the wood, nearly lost to the roar of wind. Noah's head snapped up. "Stay put," he warned, grabbing the flashlight. But Max was already on his feet, fur raised, growl low. The dog moved toward the door, then stopped halfway, sniffing the air. Emma's breath caught. She felt it too. A strange smell, something sharp and out of place amid pine smoke and snow. When Noah opened the door, a figure stood slumped against the railing. Deputy Sam Whitner, his uniform half buried under frost, face pale and streaked with blood. Sam was young, maybe late 20s, clean-cut with boyish freckles and steady eyes usually full of good humor, but now they were wild. "Sheriff," he gasped. "They took the boy, Eli Turner, down near the creek road. Black van, heading west." Then he collapsed, snow swallowing his body. Noah hauled him inside, checking for wounds. Nothing fatal, just shock. "Emma, get the blankets," he ordered. But when he looked back, the front door swung wide open again. Max was gone. Outside, the storm had grown into a white void. Through the blinding swirl, Emma saw a flicker of movement, Max bounding into the night, nose to the ground, his silhouette vanishing in seconds. Panic surged through her. "Dad! Max is chasing them!" Noah turned too late. Emma had already thrown on her coat and darted into the storm. He shouted her name, but the wind devoured his voice. The world beyond the cabin was chaos. Sheets of snow slashing sideways, trees bending under the gale. Emma could barely see her hands, but she followed the paw prints that glowed faintly under her flashlight beam. "Max!" she cried, again and again, until her throat burned. Somewhere ahead, a faint bark answered. She stumbled through drifts up to her knees, heart pounding, until she reached the old road by the creek. Through the snow haze, she saw it. The dark shape of a van half buried in a snowbank, one door hanging open, tire spinning weakly. Inside, muffled cries. "Eli!" Eli, she shouted. The boy's voice answered, trembling. Emma, help! Meanwhile, down at the harbor's edge, Mark and Noah trudged through waist-high drifts toward the same slope. Teresa's voice crackled over the radio, distorted by interference. Signal lost. Anger base compromised. Then nothing but static. We're on our own, Mark muttered. Noah's flashlight swept over the ground, catching fresh footprints that disappeared into the ridge path. That way, he said. Back near the van, Travis Holt was losing his grip, literally and figuratively. He'd been driving the van when the storm forced them off-road. Snow clung to his beard, and his hands shook as he fumbled with the rope binding Eli. His conscience warred with fear. He was no stranger to dirt, but kidnapping a child felt different, heavier. I didn't sign up for this, he hissed, pacing. From the shadows, a voice answered. Victor Kane himself, tall and broad, his thick winter coat dusted with frost. His once dark hair had turned mostly gray, and deep scars cut along his left temple. His eyes were cold, unreadable like steel in snow. You signed up for survival, he said evenly, and survival means silence. He raised his pistol toward the bound boy. Kids talk. We can't afford that. Travis hesitated, voice cracking. He's just a kid, Vic. Then he'll scream quietly, Victor snapped. But before he could move, a low growl cut through the wind. Max burst through the snowbank, a blur of muscle and fur, teeth flashing. He slammed into Travis, knocking him sideways, the knife skittering across the ice. Victor staggered back, gun raised, firing once. Snow exploded near Max's tail. Emma, run! Eli shouted, wriggling in his ropes. But Emma didn't run. She dashed forward, yanking at the knots with frozen fingers until they came loose. Eli's face was streaked with tears, his small body trembling. Come on, she urged. The gunfire drew Noah and Mark up the ridge within minutes. The scene exploded into chaos. Victor's shots echoing, Max barking, Travis scrambling to his knees with blood streaking his sleeve. Mark ducked behind a fallen beam, returning fire, his injured shoulder screaming in pain. Victor, he shouted over the wind, you don't have to do this. Victor's laughter was raw, hollow. Don't preach to me, Collins. You ruined my life once already. You made me the villain. Mark's voice broke through the storm. You made yourself that, but you can still stop. For a heartbeat, something flickered in Victor's face. Fatigue, guilt, the ghost of who he once was. The gun in his hand trembled. Then, faint at first, but growing clearer, the wail of sirens rose through the blizzard. Red and blue lights cut faint halos in the snow. Victor's eyes met Mark's. The fury faded, replaced by something almost like peace. He lowered the weapon. Travis, clutching his arm, stared at him in disbelief. Boss! Enough, Victor murmured. He dropped the pistol into the snow just as the sheriff's convoy arrived, their headlights piercing the storm. When it was over, silence returned. Thick, heavy, and clean. The snow fell softer now, blanketing the scars of battle. Teresa strode through the drifts, her coat torn, her breath ragged, but her eyes fierce with relief. Eli clung to Emma, sobbing into her shoulder. Max sat beside them, chest heaving, a streak of blood on his fur where the bullet had grazed him. Noah knelt, pressing his forehead to the dog's muzzle. Good boy, he whispered. Under the storm's dying breath, Mark stood over Victor, now cuffed and quiet, his gray eyes turned toward the falling snow. It didn't have to end like this, Mark said softly. Victor's reply was barely audible. It never ends any other way. Then the wind carried his words away. Morning broke over Duluth like a long sigh after too much fear. The blizzard had passed, leaving the world washed in silver and quiet. The lake stretched outward beneath the pink breath of sunrise, its surface glinting like shards of broken glass stitched together by light. Snow still lined the harbor roofs, but the sirens were gone, replaced by the hum of rebuilding, a slow, steady rhythm that always came after chaos. Inside the sheriff's office, the heater buzzed and coffee steamed in mismatched mugs. Sheriff Teresa Hale stood near the frosted window, one arm resting on the sill. She looked older now, not from age but from the weight of sleepless nights. Her hair, once fiery auburn, had faded slightly at the roots, but her eyes still carried the sharp green of command. "It's official," she said quietly, turning toward Officer Mark Collins, who sat at the corner desk with his arm still bound in a sling. "Victor Kane got life without parole. Travis Holt took 20. The rest cut deals, but none of them walk free." Mark nodded, his jaw flexing with something between relief and exhaustion. "Justice," he murmured. "Finally." The trial had lasted only a week, short, brutal, and public. The evidence found at the burned garage and the port caches had torn the smuggling ring open like rotten fabric. Mark's testimony was steady, detailed, every word weighed like stone. When the verdict came down, there'd been no outburst, no sound, but the low creak of the courtroom bench as Victor rose one last time to face the light. The man who had once been all command and arrogance now looked stripped bare, gray hair disheveled, face weathered, his hands trembling slightly as the cuffs locked in place. He hadn't spoken a word since. A week later, the town gathered at Duluth City Hall, a tall brick building overlooking Lake Superior, its clock tower framed by the last remnants of melting snow. Inside, the crowd filled the room to the walls. Reporters, families, and townsfolk packed every seat, the air carrying the faint scent of pine and coffee. A podium stood at the front, draped in the flag, flanked by the sheriff's seal and a banner that read, "In service and sacrifice we find strength." Mark stood backstage, straightening his uniform jacket. The navy fabric felt strange after weeks of bandages and hospital scrubs. His reflection in the mirror showed a man changed. The stubble was gone, replaced by a neatly trimmed beard. The old scar along his chin looked softer now under the hall light. The tension that had once haunted his eyes was replaced by quiet gratitude. Beside him, Teresa adjusted her collar and smirked. "Nervous?" she asked. "You're the one giving the speech." "I've faced worse," Mark replied, smiling faintly. "Bullets, bureaucrats." "And small talk with the mayor," Teresa added. "That's the real danger." When the ceremony began, the hum of conversation quieted. Teresa stepped up first, her voice carrying warmth and steadiness. "Tonight, we honor courage," she began. "Not the loud kind that shouts into the wind, but the kind that holds steady when no one's watching." She gestured toward Mark. "Officer Mark Collins, for bravery under fire and selfless service in the Duluth Harbor operation, is hereby awarded the Medal of Valor." Applause rippled through the hall. Mark stepped forward, accepting the silver medal, its weight cold against his chest. Then, to the crowd's surprise, he reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 smaller cases. "If it's all right, Sheriff," he said, "there are others who deserve this more than me." He turned toward the front row. There sat Emma Brooks, her gray-blue eyes wide beneath her neatly braided hair, feet barely touching the floor. Next to her, Max sat tall and alert, his fur clean and glossy, his tail thumping softly against the wooden stage. On his neck gleamed a fresh collar polished to shine. The audience leaned in, smiles spreading as Mark knelt before the pair. "When I was lying in the snow, I thought that was it," he said. "But this little girl and her old dog refused to let me die. They reminded me that heroism doesn't wear a badge. It just listens to the call of the heart." He pinned a silver medallion to Emma's cardigan and another to Max's collar. The dog gave a single, proud bark that echoed across the chamber, and laughter rolled through the room like sunlight breaking ice. Even Teresa grinned, shaking her head. "Well," she said softly, "that's one speech I won't top." Later, when the applause faded and the hall emptied into chatter, Noah Brooks approached Mark. He looked stronger now, his shoulder healed, his once somber face softened by rest. The lines around his eyes had turned to something gentler. "You did good," he said. "You too. That garage find saved us all." Noah shrugged. "Couldn't have done it without Max." The dog wagged his tail as if agreeing. Teresa joined them, sipping coffee from a paper cup. "You two planning on resting anytime soon?" Noah smiled. "Actually, I'm going back on the rescue team. The state called. And Eli's grandpa offered to reopen the old garage. We're turning it into a rescue training center for kids. Turner and Brooks rescue and repair. Teach them safety, search, the works." Teresa's eyebrows rose. "From crime scene to classroom, that's poetic." "Or redemption," Noah said quietly. "Same thing," Mark added. By evening, the sky blushed gold and rose above the frozen lake. The city lights flickered alive along the shoreline, tiny stars reflected in the water's edge. Emma walked with Max along the narrow boardwalk where the wind came softer now, carrying the faint cry of gulls and the smell of thawing pine. She wore the medal under her coat, fingers brushing it every few steps. Max walked beside her, his pace slower than before, his breath rising in small clouds. "You're still my hero, you know," she whispered. The dog pressed against her leg, tail sweeping gently across the snow. Ahead, the lake opened wide, vast and shimmering under the fading sun. Behind them, the clock tower chimed 6 times. At the city hall steps, Teresa and Mark stood watching the last crowd drift away. Teresa tucked her gloved hands into her pockets. "Next storm, I'm staying inside," she said dryly. "Let the rookies play hero." Mark chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Fine by me, as long as someone saves me a plate of Duluth waffles." She laughed, shaking her head. "Deal." As twilight fell, the lake turned silver again, smooth and endless. The wind whispered through the trees like a promise. Of peace, of renewal, of courage remembered not in headlines, but in quiet acts of grace. Somewhere behind the city, the faint howl of a dog echoed into the open sky, long and steady, like a hymn carried across the frozen shore. In the hush that followed the storm, Duluth stood reborn, not just in the calm of its streets, but in the hearts of those who had endured the darkness together. The blizzard had been more than weather. It was a trial, a quiet test of faith. And in the stillness afterward, something sacred shimmered between the flakes of melting snow. The reminder that God still works through the smallest hands, the gentlest voices, and the loyal hearts that refuse to give up. The miracle was never in the thunder or the fire. It was in a little girl who ran toward danger when others froze, in a wounded man who chose mercy over vengeance, and in an old dog who guarded the light until morning came. These were not grand gestures carved in stone, but quiet echoes of grace, the kind that still happen every day around us if we dare to look closer. Maybe the true lesson is this: we don't have to be perfect to be instruments of God's love. We just have to be willing. Every time we reach out a hand, forgive when it's hardest, or protect someone weaker, we take part in a miracle that doesn't make headlines, but changes heaven's balance all the same. So tonight, as you close this story, take a moment to whisper a prayer for the brave, the broken, the forgotten, for the strangers you'll meet tomorrow who might need your kindness more than you know. And if this story touched your heart, share it. Let it travel farther than the storm's last wind. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from, so we can see how far these stories of faith and courage reach. Subscribe to join our journey of hope, loyalty, and redemption, where every paw print tells a story. May God bless you, and may His miracles, large or small, find their way quietly into your life, just as they did into Duluth beneath the falling snow.